with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so very, very happy that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Himalaya, Ghana, wherever you find your podcasts. And please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Spread the word to everybody you know and love. Join us right now from the great city of Atlanta in Georgia. Our guest is here today to celebrate her beautiful novel. It's called The Spirit Glass. Please welcome to the show, Roshani Chokshi. Roshani, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted to have you on. Roshani shared she had a challenging evening last night. She is a new mom, and all the parents that are listening can say, yeah, been there, done that. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
No, I haven't slept. I'm thinking about all those times that I would just luxuriate in bed and just do nothing, like eat breakfast, go back to sleep. You know, why not? So never again, God willing.
Well, yeah, never again. You know, there was a controversy recently about an influencer being on social media, and she posted something. I think she was 28 or 29, and she said, "Oh, last night I went to a concert, and it's great, and it's 11:30 this morning." And I thought, I need to get up. And then I thought, why? I don't have kids. I don't have to do anything. So she stayed in bed. And, you know, a lot of folks are celebrating that. A lot of parents are like, oh, it's so selfish. And being a parent is, I believe, whatever you're into, you want to start a family. It's wonderful. I adored the time that my kids were young. There were many times like you, I didn't sleep all night and it was really hard. But as I look back, it was wonderful. But I also know that if I didn't want to be there, it would have been torture. So, you know, I'm really happy that you were enjoying, because you have a huge smile on your face. So it just might be that your brain stopped working and this is your natural.
I think it's a combination of that, but you know, like she's up at 5 a.m. and I keep trying to get her to back to sleep, and then I give up and look at her and she just goes, "Agoo." And you're just like, oh, well, I guess it's fine. And if you really want to gossip, sure, I'll find some secrets for you and we can discuss it all. But she is such a joy. Yeah. So it does make up for it.
That's awesome. Well, let's spill some secrets right now and tell everybody what The Spirit Glass is all about.
Okay, so The Spirit Glass is, oh my gosh, such a special novel for me. It's my first standalone middle grade novel, and it draws from a lot of Filipino mythology and folklore. I would say that it's a ghost story at its heart, which is perfect for spooky season. And it is as much about how recognizing what's right in front of you can save you from the thing that might be standing right behind you. Dun, dun, dun.
Ooh, I like that. I've mentioned here in the podcast, I grew up loving spooky stories. There was a writer here in New England. His name was Edward Rose Snow, and he would write ghost stories that were based in New England. And I remember writing my own ghost stories. He wrote one about something that happened on one of the harbor islands here in Boston. And so that was my thing. We would go out there, you know, for school trips, and I would, as everybody's running around this island, and there's an old Revolutionary War fort on one of the islands, I would be going around like I'm doing research, like, okay, who's in this little secret chamber, and, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So I loved it. When I became a parent, though, it was really funny. When I became a parent, I was in the middle of an Anne Rice novel, and my son was born, and then after we got home, I picked up the novel again, and I said, nope, don't want to go to this spooky, scary, weird place. Not for me.
So interesting. I mean, my husband and I were talking about something similar, just like the sort of things that we can stomach watching. And I think it was a really big inspiration for the spirit glass. In fact, we struggled for years to be able to have a child, and we went through IVF, and I wrote the spirit glass in the aftermath of our first miscarriage. And it was the sense of how grief and ghost stories are in so many ways, like when you deal with incomplete grief, like you lose someone too soon, or you find yourself relinquishing a dream that never even came to pass, and you mourn that insubstantialness. It feels like you're living through a ghost story. And there is something about spooky stories in particular that validate your fear, but also give you a deep sense of catharsis. When you lay a ghost to rest, it's just the sense of acceptance, that the grief is not going to go away, but that you've folded it into yourself once more, that you can keep going.
Yeah. You mentioned miscarriage, and I'm certainly sorry that you experienced that. My beautiful wife and I experienced that too. And I think the hardest part of that was that no one else got the grief that we were feeling. If it had been a child that had been born, everybody, but there were so many people, especially the helpful folks at the doctor's office and in the hospitals, that were saying, well, it's probably for the best. It probably was. And
oh,
dude,
that's
not helping at all.
Oh, no, it's a sense of, when I remember discussing it, it is a sense of incomplete grief, because there's something that I wrote in the spirit glass, which was about how sometimes what's worse than a nightmare was having only half a dream come true, like it was the dream come true of being pregnant, and then it's cut short, and there is something so just, no one can really understand what it's like to mourn a dream. Like, you can't hold it. You can't trace the shape of it. You can't weigh it on a scale, but my God, it bows your shoulders. It breaks your back to carry that with you every day.
Yeah. And I suppose while most middle schoolers aren't dealing with the loss of an unborn child in a miscarriage, they're experiencing a lot of half-realized dreams, or dreams that aren't fulfilled. And I think we need to be conscious of that as parents. I think just like the doctor's telling me, hey, it's probably for the best, that's probably not what a middle schooler wants to hear when, they didn't make the team, or they were trying out for band and they got second violin instead of first.
Yeah. And, for Corazon, who's our main character in the novel, she's a babaylan, which is a Filipino shaman, essentially, and her powers haven't matured yet. And she feels like every single week, the day that she looks forward to the most is Sunday. And that's because that's when her entire family gets together for a Sunday dinner. And that includes her parents, even though they've been dead for 3 years. And so for her, she wants her powers to come back so that she can bring her parents back to life. And when I think about what so many younger audiences are facing, I think that, your first lesson growing up is how do you tackle the unknown, right? It's why do bad things happen to good people? And you and I were discussing this a little bit before we started our official chat, but what children really thrive with the most are boundaries, and it's a sense of safety in your environment. So the grief, it's not, although it was the grief of loss, and particularly the loss of a pregnancy that fueled the spirit glass. When I was thinking about the grief and stuff that I hope younger audiences will connect with, it is to validate their sense of fear when they don't know what's coming next, because that's certainly, it at a high level was what we were going through. We don't know what would happen next. We don't know why this terrible thing happened at all. But that grief, whether it looks like the loss of a child, whether it's the loss of a parent, whether it's just, even for so many children growing up during the pandemic, whether it's the loss of the school year as you imagined, that is all part of the complexity of grief. Those are all different faces of grief.
Yeah. You're mentioning the pandemic. That was such a bizarre moment in history. And one of the things that I was really trying to remind folks of here through the podcast and in people in my life was reminding parents that, your kid, for us, it's a year. For me, I'm almost 100. So 2 years, it's like, 2% of my life. But, for a 5-year-old, for a 10-year-old, 2 years for a 10-year-old, it's 20% of your life.
Yes.
That you're locked down and you don't know what's going on and you have this disease that people probably aren't talking to you about all that much, but you're just hearing it's ravaging everybody. And if we don't wear a mask,
exactly. I mean, that's such a good way to put it, especially like how we relate to time. I think that the advice I'm given the most often as a new parent is that the days are long and the years are short. And I feel that acutely. And yet when I think about what it was like being a kid, those beautiful nostalgic moments where summer feels endless, the flip side of that is exactly as you said, when times are bad, they feel infinitely bad.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I remember doing punishment laps in high school for my soccer team. And I was like, is this ever going to end? I'm excited that you're bringing a little bit of Filipino culture to the pages. I have a number of folks from the Philippines in my life, and I don't know that much about the nation. I know the people that every person from the Philippines in my life are wonderful. They're just the most sweetest, kindest people that I know. And I know the Philippines is this country made up of like thousands of islands. But I also know that like Ireland, like Puerto Rico, I think there are probably more Filipinos living outside of the Philippines than there are inside. And so you're making a huge contribution to the world.
Oh, that is very generous of you to say. And I certainly hope that my Filipino readers will feel the same way. It is such a special place, though. So my mother is from the Philippines. She's Visayan, and she grew up in Manila. And, one thing that I was always obsessed with about the Philippines is how it has so many things that don't seem like they should get along in perfect coexistence. For example, the Philippines is one of the largest Catholic nations, right? And yet at the same time, there's a lot of these almost residual pagan beliefs that exist side by side. Like my grandmother was an extremely devout, very pious Catholic, and yet she also had the habit of leaving a bag of rice outside for the encanto, like the nature spirit that dwelled in the tree. There was no sense that these things could not coexist. That's one of the really, really beautiful things about the Philippines. And the other reason why I wanted to write this story and in particular why it's so important to me was it required so much research. My father is from India, and the way that I heard a lot of Hindu myths and folklore, it was very well preserved. And yet when we consider the stories of the Philippines and how they were preserved, it was totally different. And that was because of colonialism. It was dominated by the Spanish for almost 400 years. And during that time, a lot of native religions were decimated. Babaylans like Corazon in the Spirit Glass, her people were heavily persecuted. And when Catholicism was introduced, it was not a gentle conversion by any stretch of the imagination. So while we may have the names of the deities in these ancient Filipino pantheons, we don't know their stories with the same level of accuracy. And so getting to do that research, trying to step sensitively around these holes left by a legacy of colonialism and imperialism meant that for me, the only story I could write about Filipino folklore had to be a ghost story, almost as a metaphor for what that country has suffered.
Interesting to think that our culture has become, in a way, a ghost.
It is. I mean, it is and it's not, right? There's so many rich, beautiful things that have withstood the test of time. And there's so many blended practices. If anything, it hasn't been ripped entirely, but it's just been folded and folded and folded. And so you can't say for certain where something came from. And to me, that's what makes mythology and folklore so beautiful and vital. These are stories that are ferociously alive. And it made me re-examine a lot about superstitions and ghost stories in particular. When we consider an oppressed population, how are the ways in which their history, which may have been stolen from them, or and not enough people have survived to do the telling of how it was from their point of view, those facts, that truth gets passed down and woven in lullabies, superstition, ghost stories. It almost hides in the shadows of children's books, and that's where it can still be seen. That's why stories are so sacred.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think it would be especially interesting conversation to have with our kids if you have a curious middle schooler, to talk about that idea that, the hidden stories from our past that have tried to be put down and erased, sometimes they're hidden in the pages, in the corners of children's stories. And what a cool way to kind of challenge kids to, take a look at some of the stories that they've read in the past, some of those fairy tales, those classic tales, and say, what do you think might be hidden in these pages? And then just have those conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, it is always it is extremely humbling to think that any of my stories can help facilitate that. But, the way that, my parents are incredible people. They're saints for putting up with me, especially for what I put them through as a kid. But one thing that they really did for me, and which I think set me on the path of being a writer, is they cultivated a deep sense of curiosity in me and my siblings. And exactly as you said, it was like you would peer into the corners of things. My dad would constantly ask us, well, why? Or where does that come from? Or where do you think it comes from? Even stuff that was so, mundane. Like one of my favorite things I ever learned was the Latin name for tomato, which is Lycopersicum. And this doesn't sound like it would be particularly interesting, but the translation of Lycopersicum is wolf peach. And it went back to this old idea that if you ate a tomato, you might turn into a werewolf. And then it goes back even further into a knowledge that plants like deadly nightshade or belladonna, they're in the same family as tomato plants. Could there be some moment where someone ate a deadly nightshade and died, and somebody else ate a tomato and was like, wow, this would be great with mozzarella and a piece of basil? And they were like, well, that guy's definitely a wolf. The ways in which history, folklore, superstition are all transposed is such a joy. It's what makes writing so invigorating. It's what makes reading stories so magical. And as someone who is extremely squeamish about dirt, but loves the idea of being an archaeologist, language is the closest I get to that level of magic.
I love, speaking of magic, I think one of the most magical things that we can say to our kids, whether they're 3, 8, 18, is, what do you think?
Absolutely.
And sit back and be ready to accept whatever it is they think, because you're asking them. There's no right or wrong answer. I know now that we were joking before we started recording. My daughter and I have very different views of the world, and I have to be able, and it's a good thing to be able to sit down and go, okay, you think that way. And it's amazing how often she is able to open up my eyes and to see things that I hadn't been able to see before.
Absolutely. I love that point of view. I think the moment you make yourself inflexible, that's a tragedy. That is a death, in my opinion. That's the death of a person.
Well, I love this, the tale of the spirit glass. There's so many things that I think that, so many conversations that this book can launch. And I think it's a perfect book for families to be reading, to co-read together. I don't see a lot of families sitting down, although they could sit down and read The Spirit Glass aloud. I think that would be an awful lot of fun. But I'm guessing that more families would be co-reading it and then coming together and kind of discussing it like you do in a book club. And I think that would be so much fun. Before we go, I know this is part of the Rick Riordan universe. What was that like, getting invited to be part of that family?
Well, I mean, you summed it up perfectly. It is like joining a family. Rick and his wife, Becky, have been the kindest, most generous mentors. They've just, what they've done, which is truly incredible, is shared the spotlight, the enormous global spotlight that is Percy Jackson. And by doing that, they've shed light on stories from other cultures. They have uplifted authors of color and in many ways launched wholly independent careers, right? I mean, my first novel, my first middle grade book, Arusha and the End of Time, was chosen to launch the Rick Riordan Presents imprint. And yet, it's my story, it's my intellectual property. And so it's been really, really wonderful to have started off in that spotlight, but then to have emerged as my own name and my own, obviously no one else can write Percy Jackson, but just those voices are all like separate. I'm having a hard time really putting it into words, but it's been an incredible experience is really all I can say. I mean, joining the Rick Riordan Presents imprint changed my life for the better. I'm so grateful to have been part of it.
Yeah. And what's next for you? I know authors don't like to be talking about their works in progress, but I guess it's something we're supposed to ask.
Yeah. What's next for me? Gosh, I hope.
Other than sleeping.
I was telling my daughter the other day that I can't seem to get this thing out of my head. It's not even really a story. It's just a couple of characters, and they're not even main characters, but it's a pair of vultures named Pomp and Circumstance. And they had another vulture brother named Ceremony, but he left because he was trying to change the reputation of vultures into party animals. And that's it. That's all I have. Just, a couple of vultures just sort of harumphing around and talking about how their stomach acid is really important for the ecosystem. And I asked my daughter, what do you think I should do with it? And, she just let out a luxurious poop, and that was it. So I think that her opinion is that it's shit and I should start over.
I don't know if I agree. I think that would be a great picture book.
Well, she's a tough audience. I mean, we've even tried sometimes to read her some of my own work, and she just like juts out her lower lip in the most extravagant pout of, I hate this. This story is not about me. I am the only main character that you should ever be thinking about, and I'm done. So hopefully I'll be able to find a story that captures her interest.
I think you will. I absolutely think you will. And before I forget, if another child you should be blessed with another child, when that child comes into the world and your daughter comes in to meet that child, you should have a toy that the new child brought to your daughter.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Because it's like, they don't sit down and go, where was it inside the belly? They just like, you brought a toy for me? Oh, that's great.
To start it off on the right note of just oblations and gifts and sacrifices. I mean, our nickname for our daughter is the Kraken. And our joke is that, we have to make daily libations to the Kraken to appease her horrible, immortal fury. It's endless fun and endless exhaustion.
Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about the Spirit Glass and also more about you.
Well, you can find me online on Instagram at Roshani Chokshi, and then my website, which is www.roshanichokshi.com. And you can find the Spirit Glass wherever books are sold. So I very much hope that the story resonates with you.
We've had a great time talking about a lot of things, including the Spirit Glass with our guest, Roshani Chokshi. Roshani, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading With Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.